Hello everyone, my name is Dylan and welcome to another British English listening exercise. So today we have an absolute classic Christmas story called The Gift of the Magi, written by the brilliant American author O. Henry. So of course this story was extremely well written, however it was published 118 years ago, and therefore some of the words are slightly outdated. Because of this, I have modernized it slightly, just to make it a bit easier to understand. Enjoy. The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. Modernized and Britishized. £1.87. That was all, and 60 pence of it was in pennies. Pennies saved 1 and 2 at a time by haggling with the grocer, the hairdresser, and the butcher, until one's cheeks burned with the silent accusation of cheapness that such dealings implied. 3 times Della counted it. £1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing left to do but flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did just that, which prompts the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles and smiles, with sniffles predominating. In the hall below the flat was a letterbox, into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Next to that was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flung to the breeze during a former period of prosperity when James was being paid £300 per week. Now, when the income was shrunk to 100, the letters of the Dillingham looked blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. James Dillingham Young came home and reached his flat, he was called Jim, and greatly hugged by Mrs. Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with the powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a grey cat walking along a grey fence in a grey back garden. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she only had £1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months, and this was the result. £20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she'd calculated. They always are. Only £1.87 to buy a present for Jim. Her Jim. Many a happy hour she spent planning for something nice for him. Something fine and rare and sterling, something just a little bit near to being worthy of the honour of being married to Jim. There was a tall mirror between the windows of the room. Perhaps you have seen a mirror in a cheap flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its colour within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to its full length. Now, there were 2 possessions of the Dillingham Youngs in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the flat across from hers, Della would have let her hair hang out of the window to dry, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor with all his treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard from envy. Now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again nervously and quickly. She faltered for a minute and stood still while a tear or two splashed on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket, on went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she cluttered out of the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped running, the sign read, Madame Sofronie, hair goods of all kinds. Della ran up the stairs, panting until she reached the shop. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off, and let's have a sight at the looks of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. 20 quid, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practised hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, and the next 2 hours went by as quick as a flash. Forget the hashed metaphor. She was ransacking the stores for Jim's present. She found it at last. It had surely been made for Jim and no one else. There was no other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned all of them inside out. It was a platinum watch chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by pretentious ornamentation, as all good things should do. It was certainly worthy of the watch it would be attached to. As soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value. The description applied to both. £21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 78 pence. With that chain on his watch, Jim would be eager to check the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way a little to prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lit the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with £1.87? At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made, and the frying pan was on the back of the stove, hot and ready to cook the turkey. Jim was never late. Della played nervously with the watch chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. Then she heard the sound of his steps coming towards the front door, and she turned white for just a moment. She had a habit of saying silent prayers about the simplest, everyday things, and now she whispered, "Oh, please, God, please make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened, and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22, and to be burdened with a family. He needs a new overcoat, and he was without gloves. Jim stepped inside the door, as immovable as a dog at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed upon Della, and there was an expression in them that she could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, nor any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her fixedly, with the peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off and sold it because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim, laboriously, as if he had not arrived at the patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labour. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you like me just as well, anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked around the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone," he said, with an air almost of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone too. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went for you. Maybe the hairs of my head were numbered," she went on with a sudden serious sweetness, "but nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the turkey on, Jim?" Jim drew a package from his overcoat pocket and threw it upon the table. "Don't make any mistake, Del," he said. "About me, I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut or a shave or a shampoo that can make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going for a while at first." White fingers and nimble tore at the string and paper, and then an ecstatic scream of joy, and then, alas, a quick change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate appreciation for the woman's fabulous husband. For there lay the combs. The set of hair combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped for long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoise shell with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in the beautiful vanished hair. They were expensive combs, she knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers, but The locks that should have enjoyed the coveted adornments were gone. But she hugged them to her bosom, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and a smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Della leaped up like a little scared cat and cried, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly upon her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at the time 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the sofa and put his hands under the back of his head and smiled. "Dell," said he, "let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them there for a while. They're too nice to use right now. Besides, I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. So, why don't we put that turkey on?" Right guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, why not consider subscribing to the channel and of course liking the video. I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas, and if you don't celebrate that, that's completely fine. I hope you have a merry life in general. Right guys, thank you again for watching. I do have a whole playlist of these short story videos, so I will put those as a card on the screen. If you enjoyed this one, why not check those out as well. Right guys, thank you again, and until next time, cheers.